Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Independent Activist with me, Fra Hughes, in Belfast. And I have the pleasure and the honour of being joined today by Sarah Cott. And Sarah lives in the United Kingdom, and she's going to explain to us just something that's happened to her as part of her activism. It's not only an interesting story, but it has ramifications for the civil rights of everybody who lives under what we're told is a democracy, but more and more appears to be an authoritarian regime where they're using the law to punish people who are standing up for human rights and imprisoning people who take direct action in order to prevent genocide. So, Sarah, you're very welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us who you are, what the story is, and we're going to take things from there. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, my name is Sarah. I am a student in London. I'm an international student from France. I got involved in the Palestine movement very early on, and certainly have been active during this whole period since October 2023. I was arrested in January 2024 during a raid on my flat. So 7 police officers showed up at my flat, arrested me under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act, which makes illegal expressions of support for prescribed organizations, and then seized my devices, seized political literature, seized leaflets, anything really which looked kind of political or Palestine related. They took with them, including my kafia, and this was related to an alleged offense which happened 4 months prior, in which I delivered a speech outside of my university, which was SOAS at the time, supporting the Palestinian resistance, supporting the right of the Palestinians to fight back against occupation, against genocide, by whatever means they find necessary, which is a right that's enshrined in international law. After I delivered that speech, it was circulated all over Zionist Twitter. I was doxxed by Zionists on Twitter, and then it was organizations like UK Lawyers for Israel, which are these disgusting hate groups, which essentially bring fully formed cases to the police so the police can just arrest activists on the streets once they find them. Did that policing work essentially relating to my speech, and then I ended up being arrested by the police 4 months after my arrest, after the alleged offense. So when they came to my house, I was really confused about what I was getting arrested over because so much time had passed. So that was in January 2024. Since then, I've been on bail. So I've had conditions limiting my ability to travel outside of England and Wales. So I can't even go to Scotland. I've had my passport confiscated. And that lasted for over a year. And I was charged this year on the 4th of March. I was charged under 2 counts of Section 12 of the Terrorism Act. So Section 12 includes a penalty of up to 14 years of prison time. So it's really not a light sentence. It's not an easy thing to deal with. And the day that I was charged, another one of my comrades who came to support me at the police station also got arrested under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act for a speech that they had made back in 2023. So at that point, we became the SOAS too, because both of us were SOAS students. Both of us arrested under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act for speeches in support of the Palestinian resistance, in support of the Palestinian people as people fighting for their freedom, and not just these endless victims, right? They are people with agency. And so we've been building this defense campaign since then. I'm the only one who's been charged, but obviously my comrade is still on bail, still under investigation. And, this case is really, really important for anyone who values their right to free speech, even just their right to speak about international law, because this is what the basis of what we were saying was. So it's really important for us to be able to build this case, to rally people around it, because at the end of the day, it's the movement which suffers when people get convicted over things like these.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've only just started telling that story, and there's so much to unpack just in that simple 2 minute kind of explanation of what happened to you and where we are. This is a well-worn path. We've seen this with Sarah Wilkinson. The raids at 4 o'clock in the morning, 7, 10, 15, heavily armed anti-terrorism police. In her case, for a woman in her 70s, a journalist to be dragged from her bed, taken to a police station, charged, probably handcuffed, fingerprinted, or photographs taken, interrogated, thrown into a cell, which I imagine, excuse me, is all the things that you've suffered. But it's also, there's like a dichotomy here in a way.
Mm.
The police don't appear to be proactive. Maybe they are now, but before they didn't seem to be proactive in hunting people down. So they'll say, well, they need a complaint. Someone must be offended by what someone else has said in order for them to open an investigation. But it appears that the undue influence that these lawyers for Israel, or whatever their generic name is, these guys are actively hunting people who are standing up in international law. Because I not only agree with you, but I'm going to say Palestinian people have the right under international law to resist illegal occupation by any means necessary.
Mhm.
Now, that's not a call to violence. That is an endorsement of international law, which allows people illegally occupied to liberate themselves by
Absolutely.
any means that they find necessary. Okay, so I agree with what you said. I agree that this, from my perspective, because I live in the north of Ireland, this is a political trial. And just quickly, we have a group here in Belfast, Boycott, Divest and Sanction, BDS Belfast. Great people, do brilliant work. They've been in the Sainsbury's every day in West Belfast for probably 12 to 18 months. They remove all the Israeli products from the shelves. And at one point, they used to put stickers
Mm.
onto the particular products to alert people to what they were buying. So I believe they put a sticker maybe on like a soda stream box. And then when the staff tried to remove it, it took a piece of the outer covering off.
Mm.
So one or more of the BDS Belfast group have been in the same position as you, arrested, brought before the magistrates, and then they have this like sword of Damocles hanging over your head. You don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know where the charges are going to go. You don't know what's going to happen when you go to court. They demanded a jury trial, which was refused. And eventually, after something like a year, the court case was heard, I think, last Friday. All charges were dismissed because there's basically no evidence to convict these BDS activists of having deliberately carried out an act of vandalism, which is basically what they were charged with. So
Mm.
we have this all over the UK, it's all over Europe. Anyone who puts their head above the parapet, the old thing that, it's the nail that sticks out that gets hammered. So when you stand up for truth and justice, when you stand up in what I consider to be in full compliance with the Fourth Geneva Convention, that there is a moral and legal imperative on governments, organisations, companies, and individuals to prevent a genocide. I was
Absolutely.
recently on the flotilla, and that's exactly what we were doing on the Global Samud Flotilla. International law, Fourth Geneva Convention, trying to bring a genocide to an end. So, your court case, is this the first time you'll have appeared in court? And this is coming up this Friday. Why do you
Yes.
think you're being prosecuted, Sarah? And what do you think the ramifications are for anyone? It's not just about Palestine. We know it's Palestine today. It'll be socialist action around workers' wages tomorrow. It'll be strikers on the front line getting arrested, brought before the court. So, it's a minefield. So, like, how are you going to negotiate it? And what do you think's really behind this?
Absolutely. I've actually been in court 3 times already. So once at the magistrates, twice at the Old Bailey and Crown Court, and so I'm coming again to the Old Bailey on the 7th of November, and then my trial is scheduled for the week starting the 22nd of June 2026.
Wow.
So that feels far away, but really it's going to be here quite soon. I think we need to be clear that whatever we win in the courts is fought for on the streets. That's really, really important, because when we enter the court, as activists, as anti-imperialists, as socialists, and so on, we're so keenly aware that there's a power imbalance in this space. It's not a politically neutral space, right? That the law was created to protect the rich and the powerful in the very first instance, and not to protect regular working class people, working people who will then, defend the rights of oppressed peoples around the world against British imperialism and so on. So we are under no, illusion that just by fighting in the courts we can win only there. It's so important to have a movement on the streets who will defend comrades, who will defend people when they are criminalized, when they're attacked by the state. And as you've mentioned, most of the time, the aim of the CPS or whoever is going after activists isn't even to get them locked up. It's to harass them, it's to scare them, it's to get them to demobilize, suffer the kind of individual consequences which come with being arrested and charged, because you might lose your job. If you require an enhanced DBS check for work, that won't come up clean anymore, and so on. So we need to be very clear that we can fight these things, but we need to be on the streets to do it. We need to be militant. We need to be really politically active in supporting people, whether that means coming outside of police stations, coming outside of the court, coming outside of prisons, and so on, for comrades who are held on remand, because it's going to be a real test to the strength of the movement, right? We won't be able to carry on if our right to free speech, our right to protest is chipped away little by little. And the way this kind of works is that it's the most, radical sections of the movement which are attacked first. That's why, especially speech around, saying victory to the Intifada or globalize the Intifada was attacked very, very early on. Why speaking about the Palestinian resistance is always amalgamated to Hamas, to support for terrorism, because those are the kind of more radical positions you can take. The state can more easily get away with criminalizing them, and then slowly it becomes that even supporting Palestine at all, speaking about Palestine at all, will be, criminal speech under British law. So from the first person who's criminalized, we need to come out fighting, come out in support of them, regardless of, the kind of minute political differences we have as different individuals and groups within one movement. It's really, really, important, because how do we fight repression? How do we fight attacks from the state? We fight it with solidarity on the streets.
Yeah, absolutely. We do that. I mean, when people have been arrested here, as many people as possible go down and hold like a vigil outside the police station, and they refuse to leave until the person who's been incarcerated is released. That could take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. People have like a party atmosphere. People chat. Somebody brings pizza. Somebody brings water. And that's how people pass the time. Now, one thing that's come into my mind twice is like the Nietzsche poem. First they came for the socialists, et cetera, which is actually what they're doing in this case. So when everybody else stands back and eventually they come for them, that's because we haven't stood together in unity going forward. But you're right. The target, the individual within the radical, we'll call it the radical left, because that's the majority of people who, to my mind, are kind of leading this vanguard. And in some respects, it's the leaders then. So the people who are willing to stand up and give a speech are the people who get recorded, and then people in the background sit and find, is there anything they've said, a slip of the tongue, an insinuation of something that mightn't have been necessarily implied in the context of the conversation, in order to criminalize the people who want to stand up for humanity. Because it's not just about Palestine for me. I mean, we see what's happening in Cuba, we see what's happening in Venezuela, we see what's happening in, Faso. So it's important to join all those dots And I know people will disagree on different levels. But what they're also doing is they're sending a message out to people who maybe aren't militant and aren't radical, but are maybe going down that road, because the state doesn't necessarily give people another chance. I mean, we have our marches in Belfast, so people
Mm.
march from Ryder Square to the City Hall, and you have to apply for state permission, and then you get the police at the front and the police at the back. And if it's between 12 and 2, then at 2:05 they come over and say, now, guys, this was meant to finish 5 minutes ago. We'll give you 5 minutes to disperse. So in some respects, it's almost like controlled opposition. You can march every day, 7 days a week, for every day of this genocide, which is over 750 days or something already. And the state isn't concerned about that. I
Mhm.
personally feel these are like safety valves. If some of these groups didn't exist that call for people to come onto the streets, the state would probably create them. People are angry. People want to express that anger. People want the genocide to stop. So the
Absolutely.
marches are a safety valve. People feel they've done something. Then they have a beer afterwards. They go shopping. They meet friends. And I say, well, what did you accomplish? And I say, well, like, what else can you do? We'll have to do something. But that something is probably further down the line than simply just marching. That's boycott. That's maybe standing outside McDonald's and Starbucks and Pizza Hut and whoever's on the potential boycott list, and hand out leaflets and encourage people not to buy their products, goods, and services. So it's state repression, in my opinion. If you're not allowed to leave England and Wales, I mean, this sounds like, the way people used to criminalize and punish the Soviet Union. You're like internally exiled, if that makes
Mhm.
sense, because you can't leave the jurisdiction. And by hanging this over your head, I think what they did in Belfast, they were hoping that eventually someone would say, okay, just to get it over with, I'll plead guilty to a lesser charge or something. So that's a very serious charge that you have.
Yeah.
And there's two of you facing this. So what kind of solidarity do you have? What can other people do to help? Would you like as many people as possible to be outside the court on the day of the hearing? But what is the hearing? Is it to check your bail conditions going forward if the hearing's not until next June? And is that like 18 months between when you were, did you say January 24 or March 24 is when March 24, you were originally detained, arrested,
Yeah,
uh,
January 2024, I
enforcement?
was arrested, and then March 2025, I was charged.
Okay, okay. So yeah, but then that's been hanging over your head for like
Yeah.
all that time, and now you're going to be into next year. And if it's anything like some of the other cases, you'll have your court date, and on the day, if the CPS, even though it's, in my personal opinion, it's a political prosecution, they might at that time try and put it off for another 3 months or 6 months, because they don't really have the evidence in their own minds for conviction, and they just want to drag the process out in order to wear you down as much as possible. So personally, where do you go from here? You'll have to obviously watch what you say in public, watch what you put online, because they'll be watching you like a hawk. And there's always entrapment as well. I'll be worried of that. I'll be worried of somebody trying to get you to say something, and then they go, there you go, she said that again. That makes case number 2 or case number 3. So it's about silencing you as an individual under laws that I assume are meant to protect society, but are actually being used against innocent members of society for a political
Mhm.
agenda, which Keir Starmer is enforcing through the Home Office. So it's the police might be at your door, but I'd say this goes to Starmer.
Yeah,
He's the one
absolutely.
telling people, we want these Palestinian supporters, we want them quietened, we want them in prison, we want them off the streets. And so we are moving closer and closer to an authoritarian, semi-fascist state. So what do you think? What do you think the country's going, without saying anything that would, get yourself in any more?
Yeah, I mean, we have to look at the history of the Labour Party, I think, when we talk about these things, and what has been their policy in the past before Keir Starmer was even leader of the party. The act that I was arrested under, the Terrorism Act 2000, was ushered in by Labour under a Blair government. And it was an expansion on the Prevention of Terrorism Act, the PTA,
which was brought in for the Irish.
exactly, brought in to criminalize support for Irish liberation. It did nothing to stop, attacks on civilians or whatever it was justified as. It was meant to criminalize solidarity across Britain with Irish people standing up against British occupation, against British imperialism. And then those powers were expanded by the Terrorism Act 2000, by Labour, to include, a whole host of other causes, of other national liberation movements. So that's when you see that Palestinian organizations become banned, Kurdish organizations become banned, Tamil organizations, and so on, Muslim organizations. And that's meant to criminalize anti-imperialist resistance. That's meant to support the status quo, protect the status quo, because the Terrorism Act is not like any other piece of legislation. It gives the police and the CPS much greater powers to those, to just detain the people arrested under it, to interview them for longer amounts of time, to impose harsher conditions, and so on and so on. So, it's not a accident that we're seeing that the Terrorism Act is being used now. It's because it's been developed as this tool for the state. Over the past decades, it's been a key kind of Labour Party policy, and now we're seeing them use it much, much more against regular activists. And we need to be clear that there's no, this does us a disservice to think that there are legitimate applications of the Terrorism Act 2000, and then it's illegitimate when it's used against us. We need to call for this legislation to be scrapped entirely, because it puts every single one of us and our democratic rights at risk as long as it exists, because it will be used against us, and it has been used against us, regardless of whether you were someone who was smashing up a factory, whether you are a member of Past Line Action, whether you're a respected professional in your field like Sarah Wilkinson, or even Fahad Ansari, who was stopped under Schedule 7 at an airport, forced to give legally privileged information to the police because he was arrested under the Terrorism Act 2000. So we need to be really, really clear about what it is, the Labour Party has done, what their policy has been in regards to resistance on the streets, in regards to Palestine as well. They've not been a friend of the Palestinian people. If you look at it historically, you can find Labour Party manifestos from the mid-20th century which talk about the dynamic Jew versus the static Arab. I mean, this is really racist language, and we can't be surprised to this day about, the Labour Party is so atrocious. The Labour Party has always been a vehicle for British imperialism, and we need to, finally break from that. So I'm not surprised that, I was arrested in the Tories, but it was under Labour that I was charged in the end. And we need to be strong in putting up a real challenge to British imperialism and demanding that, the real terrorism against people of the global South by, British imperialists, by American imperialists, finally ends. And in my case, actually, the hearing that's coming up on the 7th of November is to discuss expert reports that my lawyers and I have commissioned from different academics and international law scholars and so on, which, go to the heart of the matter in this case, because the prosecutors and the judges, they don't want to speak about the genocide. They don't want to speak about Zionism. They don't want to speak about the role of British imperialism. They don't want to speak about the fact that, this court, their salaries are paid for by, public money, that it relies on, the continued profits of the British state and so on. They don't want to talk about those things. They want to keep the debate really, really small, really constrained to this one event in isolation, to the massive historical context. So we need to broaden that up and say, what's at stake really in this case is British support for Zionism, for Zionist genocide, in Gaza. This is what at stake here. And it's our right to speak out and support those fighting back against that, which is at stake. That's kind of our mission at the moment, is to make it even more political than it already is, force the prosecutors and the judges to face the consequences of what it is they're really doing, because it's not just, one random legal decision that they're going to make and then that has no impact on anything else. It has, ripple effects all over the movement and all over society.
Yeah, because what they're trying to do, as you've already stated, is frighten people off the streets. They want to silence people who speak up against a genocide, in my opinion. That's what this is about. You can't criticize Israel. They're trying to say anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. We've faced that kind of barrier before. It's interesting, exactly what you said. The guys in Belfast, Marty and Owen and the other people who were charged, they wanted a jury because they wanted to stand up, and they wanted their voices heard, not only in the courtroom, but outside the courtroom, not only by the jury, but by civil society. So they wanted to stand up and say, there's a genocide. These companies are complicit. Here's a UN report. Here's what Francesca Albanese says. Here's what UNRWA says. Here's what international law says. This is what we done, and this is why we did it. And I've heard people say before, if you have a jury trial, the chances are the majority of the people on a jury, regardless that there is no real evidence, are going to support what you're saying, because they know the difference between right and wrong. They know what's criminal and not criminal, what's moral and what's immoral. And to give people that opportunity to speak about the genocide, to speak about what I consider a fascist, racist, white Anglo-Saxon colonial footprint in the Levant, which I believe needs to be dismantled if there's going to be peace within the whole West Asia region. So they're trying to silence you. They're trying to silence the cause. And I think it's a political trial, again, in my opinion. Previous experiences, to my mind, in my opinion, sometimes the person who hears the case is someone who would be favourable to the position of the government, if I could put it in those terms. We had reports in the murders here by the British Army where they claimed people were armed and had nail bombs and coffee bombs and pipe bombs and they were under attack. All proved subsequently to be lies. But like the Widgery report and other reports that went into that confirmed the British Army account, which was then disproved to be a lie. So it's from the top of the state, through the CPS, through the judiciary, and this is all macro managed by the press. So the press will vilify you. The press will, I don't know if you said you're a foreign student, but I mean, that's what they're going to do. Foreign student comes to Britain. Who are these people? She mightn't have come on a boat, but look what she's doing. She's at the Old Bailey. So will you have a jury trial? Why is it the Old Bailey? I know it's seen to be the place for terrorist criminal acts, but you're not a terrorist. You haven't performed any criminal acts that I would be aware of. Why the Old Bailey? Will you have a jury? And this case on the 7th, that's because you're challenging either the validity of the CPS prosecution or you want your bail conditions amended. What's happening on the 7th?
Yeah, so on the 7th, we're going to. So my lawyers and I have commissioned these expert reports, as I mentioned. The prosecution will argue that they're inadmissible, that they're irrelevant, essentially, and can't be used during the trial. So we're going to have an argument around that, essentially, and the judge will decide whether, in part or in whole, these reports can be used. And they're really important for us to be able to kind of expand the debate at the point where I'm on trial. My trial will be a jury trial, which is good news for me, because the vast majority of especially Londoners, but British people in general, are horrified by what's happened in Gaza and the West Bank for the past 2 years. Really since the past 100 years, but the past 2 years especially. And I don't think anyone wants to see activists go to prison for years potentially. I mean, it's really not a unconsequential possible sentence. So yeah, that works in my favor, and it's at the Old Bailey. I live in London, so I was initially referred to Westminster Magistrates Court, and then it was immediately sent to the Old Bailey. So I think that's because it's Central Criminal Court, where terrorism cases are dealt with. But it also offers, it's symbolic in the sense of being this kind of massive building with its huge halls. The building of the Old Bailey was inaugurated in 1907 at the kind of height of the British Empire. So it serves as a powerful reminder of what it is we're up against, I think.
Yes, they're bringing you, yeah. It'll be an intimidating building in itself, just the size of it and all the people that'll be floating about inside. And I will imagine the state will try and make you look like a terrorist. So you're going to have armed people walking about the court, walking about the halls, like they're going to treat you as if you have a Category A prisoner's uniform on and you're handcuffed, and people are maybe going to try and break you out of the kind of Old Bailey itself. So I'm just going to mention, I'm not going to ask you to comment on it. I'm just going to say, I know that I interviewed Brogan Devlin. She's a sister of Jordan Devlin. That was originally one of the Filton 18. It's now the Filton 24. I know some of those people have gone on hunger strike. I'm mentioning this because it shows you the extent to which ordinary people who don't have criminal records, who aren't thugs or gangsters, who don't have malice or hate in their hearts, people who are standing up for the rights, the dignity and justice for other human beings, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their religious or political beliefs, purely a humanitarian attempt to highlight the genocide, to encourage the genocide to come to an end, and to deter companies from continuing to profit from the murder of Palestinians. So ordinary people who've been to university, people who are educated, people who have everything to lose are the very people that are coming forward and standing up. So I don't think that should be forgotten. And I think what you've done is admirable, what you're continuing to do, because by fighting this, you continue to highlight what's happening in Palestine. You continue to highlight the erosion of civil rights in the United Kingdom. That's all across Europe. In Berlin, they're beating people off the streets for having a Palestinian flag. They're arresting 9-year-olds for carrying a flag, people wearing keffiyehs, anybody who shows, I think if you say from the river to the sea in Germany, you're arrested, probably again on counter-terrorism. So we have this establishment crackdown across the EU, which includes France and Italy, Germany. Like some countries, Spain and Ireland Portugal seem to be more, politically aligned with the cause of justice and humanity. I could argue on that that's a political position they have been pushed into in order to appease their own internal populace. But, you're not just fighting for Palestine. You're fighting for every person in the United Kingdom who at a future date stands up against the state and says, not in my name, regardless of what it happens to be. And just as a quick aside, look at America. National Guard troops on the streets of Washington, D.C. I mean, that's fascism. When you bring the troops onto the streets in order to implement your political agenda. And people then are frightened to come out and protest. People are frightened they're going to be arrested. So I think it is really, 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 really important. And I wish you every success on the 7th, which is this Friday. And
Yeah.
if I was in London, I guarantee you, if I had time, I'd be down at the courthouse. So, just in conclusion, what would you like to say to people? Why is it important? I know this isn't. I know you're at the centre of this. I know you're the person being prosecuted. I don't know you, but I know that you will think it's not about you. It's about Palestine. So, what would you like to say to people in conclusion, and for anyone else who wants to do something for Palestine, but now sees what's happening in the courts, sees the arrests of like 1,000 people for holding a placard in London? Where's it all going? And what would you say to people to maybe continue to stand up for justice?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I would say is fighting for Palestine will inevitably bring us into conflict with the British state. Right now, what we're seeing is power panicking. That's why they need to repress. That's why they need people to demobilize, is because they know how powerful Palestine is as a cause and how it can politicize a whole generation of young people and of older people as well into coming out on the streets and being loud and putting a real challenge to white state policy has been, up until now, essentially of uncritical support for Israel. We have the power to change that. The state will try, do whatever it can to make sure we're not able to do that, that we're divided, that, some people are pushed towards safer, more respectable politics rather than taking the really principled stances of standing with the resistance, speaking about a one-state solution for Palestine, speaking about British imperialism, and so on. And so when our comrades are criminalized for being at that vanguard, for being at the forefront of the Palestinian struggle, of solidarity with the resistance, of putting a real challenge to British imperialism, we need to stand with them. We need to come out and support them at their court hearings, outside of the police station, outside of the prisons, wherever they're being kept and kidnapped by the British state, the British police, and the CPS. This is really